The honest truth is, it started when I was about 9 months old. As I was growing up, it was weird because I had this whole other side of a family, obviously, my dad's side, that to this day I still don't really know. She was trying to instill in me that fear, one, fear of my father,
Yes.
and two, anger towards him. And this is when I started figuring things out because at the time I'm 12, 13 years old. And I'm seeing my mom do to my sister exactly what she did to me. So when I started figuring out, as I said, 12, 13, I stayed with her till I was about 16. And then she started giving me ultimatums. And I finally, I'm not going to do it, but I basically gave her the finger and walked out of the house at 16. I owned a car, drove to my dad's, told him what happened. He said, "You're welcome to stay." Open arms. So that's how I quote unquote escaped. But I was also still, the big fear I had then was where now she's going to really take it out on my sister. And she did. How did it affect my life? It's still affecting me at 61 years old in many ways.
Hey everybody, and welcome back to the Anti-Alienation Project. I'm Maddie, and here I talk about all things related to a certain form of child psychological abuse that I went through for 20 years, currently known as parental alienation. If you're not familiar with what parental alienation involves one angry, spiteful parent, often during a custody dispute or a divorce, who manipulates their child to reject their other loving parent without true justification. This form of abuse often leaves long-lasting damage on a child and a parent. So I speak out on my project about how harmful this is, as well as interview other child survivors of parental alienation. Today's interview is exceptionally special and incredibly eye-opening. What's particularly remarkable about Dan's story is that he has experienced this heart-wrenching form of abuse, not only as a child, but also as a targeted parent, providing him with a dual perspective that is really invaluable. Throughout this interview, you will hear Dan open up about the emotional turmoil and long-lasting effects that this abuse has had on his life, being alienated from his dad at just the tender age of 9 months old. He also shares what it was like to learn the truth at just 13 years old, still living in the home with his mother, his abuser. He talks about the heartache of watching his mom alienate his sister from her dad and how that woke him up to the truth. You'll hear how he tried to shield his sister from enduring the same fate. But Dan's story doesn't even end there. He will take you through his journey as an alienated parent as well. This interview is a must-watch for anyone affected by parental alienation, whether directly or indirectly. Please consider showing your support for Dan in the comments. Speaking out about one's own family of origin is never easy. Your words of encouragement can mean the world. Make a world of difference for him. Let's get right into it. Hi, Dan, and welcome to the Anti-Alienation Project. I'm really excited to finally have you on. I know we've been talking about putting this interview together for a while. Welcome.
Thank you, Maddie. I am super excited to be here and share my story, which was a little bit unique from some of the other ones you may have because I've dealt with parental alienation not just as a child, but also as a parent. So I've seen both sides of it.
Yes, which must add a whole different element of emotion to it. Let's just get right into your story. So if you could give a brief introduction of who you are, where you're from, and which parent you were alienated from, and how long.
Sure. So my name is Dan. Originally, I'm from Albany, New York, and now I live in the awesome state of North Carolina. And because you've been on it, I host a podcast called Men Need to Be Heard. I'm actually semi-retired. That's what my gig is now after I retired from doing IT work and owning 3 gyms. So that's was my thing for many years. And now I do this. I talk about parental alienation amongst other things on my channel. And for me, it really started, and I can't, somebody else say to me, when did it start for you? Like you were asking that. And the honest truth is it started when I was about 9 months old because my parents separated when I was about 9 months old. And it, obviously I don't remember that time, but I can honestly look now and say that's when it started. And it continued throughout my growing years up until about 13 is when I started figuring things out. And we can get into that. And then from there, within 3 years of kind of figuring things out, I left the house, and it was my mother that was alienating me from my father. I left
Hmm.
the house, ended up moving in with my dad, stayed with him for 3, 4 years, then went off to college and that kind of thing.
Okay. Look, do you mind if we back up to the beginning for a minute?
Wherever you want to go.
Oh, okay, 9 months old. Your parents get divorced. Can you characterize what your relationship was like with both of your parents? Did you have complete no contact with your dad, or were there periods of contact? What was that like in the earlier years?
Yeah, so again, we have to understand this was a different time, right? So I am 61 years old. So my parents divorced. I was born in 1963. My parents were divorced by 64. So this was all pre-family court reform and all that stuff.
Mm.
Essentially, I saw my dad, or was supposed to see my dad, every Saturday from noon to 6 p.m. That was it. And then over the years, that never really changed. Even when they started putting reforms in for family court, that never changed because my mother wasn't going to allow it to be changed.
Mm.
But as I was growing up, it was weird because I had this whole other side of a family, obviously, my dad's side, that to this day I still don't really know. It was family events were occurring. I didn't get to go to them. A lot of them have passed away now, but I had a lot of cousins. Never really got to know them. Did meet my aunts and uncles as we got older. My dad would take me over there. My one uncle lived right behind my dad. It was easy to just go through the yard and see him. But there's a whole disconnect with that side of the family that to this day has never been built. It never formed. As I was growing up, I didn't know this, but I do now. There was a hole. One of the struggles that I had was all of my friends had intact families.
Mm.
Again, 60s, 70s, divorce was not a big thing. It was rare, actually. So I was like the only kid in my peer group that was not from an intact family. Plus, like I said, I only saw my dad for 6 hours a week, basically. So it was surreal in a way, but I didn't really realize that when I was younger. I started figuring it out as I got older that this is weird. And I remember saying that to myself many times. Just, it didn't feel bad. I can't say that. It just felt odd, I guess is the word I'll use. And now that I look back, that's a tremendous hole in my life. There's a whole side of my family that, and we converse and that kind of stuff. They've all passed on, but I had two stepbrothers. One died many years ago. The other just died during COVID. I have a stepsister I have not seen since 1973. So 51 years. I can't find her. I have spent many hours and more than a few dollars trying to find her. Again, it was because of the dynamic and all the restrictions my mother was placing on my ability to have that relationship with not just my dad, but my dad's family. I lost all that. To have two older brothers would have been amazing to me, but essentially I grew up not an only child because I have a younger stepsister, which she also got alienated from her dad. But we never had that full like family like you would normally expect, right? And it's a loss that I still feel.
Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. That must have affected you in so many ways, especially with your identity.
In a way though, Maddie, it's made me who I am now, and I think I'm pretty
Yeah.
cool.
That's
You
right.
know,
That's right.
and so it's bad. Don't get me wrong. I don't want to make light of it, but in a way, I can look at it and go, okay, some good came out of it because it took me a while to heal, and we can get into that. But once I did, it enabled me to be able to do what I do now and help others and speak
Mhm.
out about the issue. I don't think I would have been able to do that without having gone through it.
Perfectly said. Really well said. Basically, what I like to do is to expose this form of severe psychological abuse from the child's point of view. So, if you can think back to when you were a child or even an adolescent, do you remember, number one, that any tactics your mom used, alienating tactics? And number
Yep.
two, what beliefs did she instill in you?
It's interesting because she tried like hell to alienate me. For whatever reason, it didn't take as well as it does with most people. Her common tactics she would use, as I said, my dad had me from noon to 6 Saturdays,
Mm.
every Saturday. If he showed up at 12:01, I wasn't going. If he returned me at 6:02, she would lose her mind. She wouldn't let me leave the house until exactly noon. I remember as a young child, very young child, we're talking 4 and 5 years old, my earliest memories.
Mhm.
Dad's here, but I couldn't leave the house. It wasn't the right time. And she would say, it's not his time to be with you or something like that. And it was weird. Again, it goes back to that surreal, weird feeling. Dad's sitting in the driveway. Why can't I go out there? That was a very common tactic. She was forever bad mouthing him and men, forever. And then she ultimately got remarried and they ended up getting divorced. And then she really went toxic. And I was 12, 13 when that happened. She was a feminist. I always say the feminists of the 70s had all the right reasons for what they were doing, right? They were fighting for equal rights. I fully support all of that. She was what I'm going to say, what feminism has become now, that toxic side of it, right?
Yeah.
It was
Oh, okay.
very difficult growing up in that because her belief was that men were horrible, and she would tell me that on a daily basis. She was trying to instill in me that fear, one, fear of my father,
Yes.
and two, anger towards him.
Yes.
That was her main goals, those two. There was a couple times he just couldn't pick me up on a particular week. He had something going on. I don't even know what they were, to be honest with you. She would spend that whole afternoon on a Saturday. I'm like 8, 9 years old. I'm watching the cartoons in the morning, that type of thing, telling me how awful my dad was and how I was going to be awful too, because I was just like him. That was a favorite
Oh.
phrase of her.
Can I
Go
just say
ahead.
something real quick? Sorry to
Yeah.
interrupt.
No, please.
But I so far haven't met anybody who's been through this whose their parent didn't use that as an insult, compare them to their targeted
Yeah.
parent, or use that name, call them by their name. My mom would always do that too, call
Mhm.
me by my targeted parent's name. I'm so sorry. It's terrible.
Like you said, it's a common tactic. And I know you talk about it and I've talked about it. You see the parallels in everybody's case, right? There are always differences here and there, but you see the same things over and over again. And it's why when people say there's no such thing as parental alienation, I just go, really? One, you're invalidating my personal experience. You're telling me I'm completely wrong. You're as bad as what my mother was. But two, you're also invalidating everyone else who had the exact same experience I did, by the
Mhm.
millions, by the way. When I look at how did my mother get to be the way she was,
Right.
I think a lot of that came from her mother.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Generational.
it passed that. Yeah, it's
Mhm.
generational. And I don't have much recollection with my maternal grandmother. I do my paternal grandmother. It wasn't a big thing, but my maternal grandmother was very toxic.
Mm.
So I can see where, and I'm not excusing my mother by any means, please don't think I am, but I can see where she got it from too.
I know yeah, I can see that too. It usually is very often generational. I just am wondering when you were with your dad on those Saturdays, do you remember what that was like? How you felt?
Oh yeah.
What you did?
It was weird.
It was weird.
Was it would be so again, it changed as I grew. What the earliest recollections I had is he would do things with me, like we would go miniature golfing, or that was a big thing with us. Our dog, his dog Pebbles, which was my dog also, I remember going with him to pick her up at the pound. In fact, that's my earliest memory in life, is going to pick Pebbles up in the car and bringing her back. I can vividly remember her coming out of that car. And I was 3, 3.5, 4, somewhere in there at the time. So we did things like that. But as I grew, we had a disconnect.
Mm.
And I don't fault my father or me there, because 6 hours a week is not enough time to have a relationship. So it was, as I was getting older, I remember watching TV a lot at his house. We were into shooting. He was very much, the whole family was into shooting. So when we were younger, we would go to the range. As we got older, that became less and less. Things like that. Trips to Kmart when we were younger, pick up a Hot Wheel. He got me a Hot Wheels every week. I had every Hot Wheel there was. But as we got older, and this is something I've never figured out why that happened. All I can say is the disconnect grew, and I think it was, my guess, this is a guess, I think it was him dealing with his pain from it.
Uh,
And he did start drinking. He always drank, but he really started drinking. And I think that was part of it too. And you know, there's a whole other dynamic, which is my dad married my mother's sister. So my aunt became my stepmother. So there's that whole dynamic. I don't normally talk about that one. Yeah, I
We'll
can see
just,
your eyes.
yeah,
We
in
don't need to
that.
go there,
Yeah.
but there's that whole dynamic too. Oh, it's
Interesting. Dan, what a
I am
story.
I am messed up. No, I'm kidding. But there was that dynamic. And again, that had part of the situation or affected the situation with my dad and I.
Sure.
Um,
Yeah, I bet your mom used that to her advantage for sure.
oh, her sister, my aunt, stepmother, whatever you want to call her, and my mother did not talk for over 20 some years.
What happened with your mom when you were 13? And was that related to learning about parental alienation?
Yeah. So that's when, well, it was about a year prior to that. She was going through the divorce with my sister's dad. And this is when I started figuring things out because at the time I'm 12, 13 years old, and I'm seeing my mom do to my sister exactly what she did to me. Now, what was different was I knew how he was. Him and I did not get along, but I knew damn well that he was
Mm.
trying to be the best dad for my sister that he could possibly be.
Mm.
And I heard all the toxicity my mother was throwing at my sister and how she would say, your dad's not here to pick you up. And he'd be in the driveway. I knew like I'd be out playing ball in the field next door. So I know he was there. And
Mm.
I'd go in the house because she was worse with my sister than with me for whatever reason. But she would say, see, your dad didn't want you. And I'm like, he was here. And I'm like, wait a minute. That's what she told me a few years back. And one of her tactics was she would try and find out what my dad was going to get me for Christmas and then buy it herself because I was always with her Christmas morning.
My mom did that too.
Yeah, yeah. I'm dating myself, but G.I. Joes, right? They were a foot tall and all that. There was one that I wanted that had a dune buggy, a yellow dune buggy of all things. My dad had it for me, but my mom had already given it to me that morning. And I remember opening it up and saying, and I feel horrible now. I didn't realize at the time. I said, I already got this from Santa.
Aww.
How come Santa gave it to me? So you think about things like that, right? And then I saw her doing that with my sister. And
Wow.
that's what woke me up. Good, bad, or indifferent. I think in a way it was a good thing for me to start figuring it out then, right?
You were so
And
young though. Were you
I
living
was
with your
12.
mom
I
when you
was.
start? So what was that like? Were you scared?
I was angry, very angry at times. We had screaming matches. I was 12, 13, 14, and just totally figuring what was going on. I'm like, wait a minute. And I was very angry. I probably did things I shouldn't have, right? I threw things because I was so angry. Not at her, but there was times I threw a dish on the floor. I know that. And that was wrong, but I also understand why I did it, right? I didn't know any better. But yeah, it was an interesting. So when I started figuring out, as I said, 12, 13, I stayed with her till I was about 16. And then she
Oh,
started giving me ultimatums. And I finally, I'm not going to do it, but I basically gave her the finger and walked out of the house at 16. I owned a car, drove to my dad's, told him what happened. He said, you're welcome to stay. Open arms. So that's how I quote unquote escaped. But I was also still, the big fear I had then was where now she's going to really take it out on my sister. And she did.
and she did. That must have been a whole nother uh horrible thing to watch. When you figured everything out, did you go to your dad or did you not tell him anything until you moved in with him later on at 16?
We had some discussions. Again, I wasn't verbalizing it right. And he didn't, God bless him, he didn't know. He just didn't know what to do. It Now, I can say this, having been on the parental side of it, right? I get where he was at. It's like,
Mm.
why is this happening to me? And I'm sure you saw it with your dad, right?
Yeah.
In conversations you had with him, where as a targeted parent, you shut down, you almost have to. It's so painful that at some point you have to divest yourself from that pain. And it may be walking away from the child. He didn't walk away from me, but in a manner of speaking, he distanced himself. So when I
Yeah.
went to him and said, Dad, I'm seeing this sister's name is Cheryl. I'm seeing mom do this with Cheryl. And I remember the same thing happening, blah, blah, blah. He also didn't know a lot of it. So I was
Mm.
blindsiding him with some stuff and he just shut down. And so it was really weird. We never really connected to just have that conversation.
Mm.
at that time. Later
Okay.
on, we did,
So glad to hear that. Yeah.
but it's still, we never fully rebuilt the relationship.
Yeah.
It was like it was too far gone. We brought it back, right? Like I said, I lived with him for 4.5 years, but there was always something missing. Now, again, I have a flawed viewpoint on it because I don't know what it's like to have a true relationship with a dad. So it could have been a perfect relationship. I just don't know it. That's another loss, right?
That's so sad. Yeah, that's a huge effect of this, I think, especially if it happens when you're such a young age. You're 9 months old. You don't have the opportunity to build a healthy relationship before the alienation. This is a really valuable viewpoint to share, actually. I don't think that I've been able to share that viewpoint very much, but
Have you had that with your dad? Because I know you've really rebuilt your relationship, but
that feeling you're talking about.
yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And especially the feeling that you're talking about at the beginning. Like when I first told him, he was blindsided as well, completely blindsided. And there's a disconnect between what I've been through and what he believes I've been through, if that makes sense.
It makes
Like,
total sense.
does it? Okay.
Yeah, because he can't know what you went through truly, or vice versa, by the way, right?
Yeah.
You have your each shared experience, but you also have a unique experience within that shared experience. And I honestly don't believe that until or unless you go through it as a targeted parent, that you can truly understand that, right? So
Yeah.
that I think that's one of the unique things that I have is when it happened to me as a targeted parent, things clicked to me.
Oh,
That's why dad was that way. That's why he said this or whatever, right? And it was his way of dealing with the pain.
oh, wow. That
He
help
was
you
not,
understand him
it
more?
helped me to understand him and understand the whole process of what was going on. And ultimately to help me heal, by the way. Because I'm not going to lie, I had some resentment towards him. Not much, but I always had in the back of my mind, where was he? Why didn't he fight? He didn't know. He knew something wasn't right, but he didn't know the level to what my mother was doing.
You're getting older, you're living with your dad. A lot of people, I think, may just think of parental alienation or hear about it and they assume, okay, so you lost time with a parent. Okay, move on. But from what I've seen, it can affect your entire life, almost every part of how you see the world, your personality, so many different things. So,
Mhm.
although you escaped at 13, did you see any other effects play out throughout your life, especially moving forward as you got older? And did you go no contact with your mom at 13 at that point?
No. So I did for a while. So let's address that, and then I'll talk
Okay.
about how it's
Yeah.
affected my life. Long story short on that, because it would take an hour. I walked away from her for 2, 3 years. You got to remember, my sister was still there, so I was still
Mm.
trying to stay engaged with my sister. This was pre-cell phone, internet, all that stuff. So I would still stop at the house to see Cheryl and all that, but I would try and do it when my mother wasn't there because I knew her work schedule. Eventually, in my senior year of high school, so it was roughly 2 years later, she wanted to, I don't want to call it reconcile, but get back in my life. She wanted to be able to go to my high school graduation and all that, and I allowed it. All right. And throughout college, we were intermittent. I would see her here and there, but it might be months between. Once I got married and started having kids, she wanted to see the grandchildren. And I was letting her slowly back in. That marriage ended. She hated my first wife. Oh God, those two were at war 24/7. They hated each other.
Sounds fun.
But it gets better, Maddie. Just before my mother died, those two became besties. Explain
Hmm.
that one to me.
I can't.
Uh, because they were both alienators and they found a common enemy, me.
No.
Yep. So anyway, I got
Oh
divorced
no.
from her, ended up remarrying to a wonderful woman. And we again, my mother's involved with the children a little bit. We never let the kids stay with her ever because I was not going to do that. But eventually she turned on my second wife. And that's when I completely disowned her. So it was 2004 and she died in 2017. I never had a conversation with her after 2004. And so that's what happened with that relationship. How did it affect my life? It's still affecting me at 61 years old. in many ways. Somebody asked me this not too long ago. What is the one thing that you think has affected you the most? And I'll say it flat out is I always looking for in any type of relationship the person to leave me, if that makes sense, right? Whether it's a romantic relationship, a friendship, coworker, whatever. They're always, in my mind, they're always looking to get away from me. That's crazy. Think about that, right? I'm always waiting for the shoe to drop, the other shoe to drop, even when there's zero reason to even think about it.
That
Uh,
actually makes complete sense to me. And I wonder if that's related to the impact it leaves a child having such low self-esteem and the core belief, negative belief, I'm not worthy of being loved.
that phrase right there is exactly it. I
Yeah.
struggle with that also. I think they're intertwined, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
they're going to leave me because I'm not worth their
Mm-hmm.
attention, time, love, devotion, whatever you want to call it, right? And that's across any relationship. I have friends that I've been friends with for 50 years, but are they ever not going to be my friend? No, of course not. But in the back of my mind, I'm waiting for them to say, I don't want to be your friend anymore, right? That's a tough way to live. And up until I didn't start healing till I was about 40. But up before that, it was almost, in some cases, I can look back and go, you know what? Because I thought that way, it triggered the person to walk away from me. So that was the biggest impact that I felt and still feel. But trust issues are forever there. And I separate them from the other one. And self-confidence in relationship. I am a very confident person, right? I talk about all the time on sports fields. I was the trash talker, right? It's not cocky if you can back it up, is my favorite saying. But within the context of relationships, not just
Mm-hmm.
romantic, any kind, it's not quite the same. I always lack self-confidence there.
So it really sounds like it ruined your attachment
It
styles.
it did it really did.
Yeah.
And I have people that I know love me without question, but it's still there's that gap, I guess is what I'll say,
Yeah.
right? And I don't think it'll ever go away. I understand it. I don't like it. I don't dwell on it much. I talk about it, but I don't dwell on it. But it's there. And a lot of it is just me thinking that way. Therapy didn't really work for me, but if somebody's feeling the way I do, I would say go get therapy.
It sounds like something related to complex trauma, honestly.
It is. It
Yeah.
essentially is.
Yeah. I guess I didn't ask you this question, but what advice would you give to someone who's just now figuring out that they've been alienated from a parent?
Ooh, that's a great question. One, take a step back. I did this without knowing I was doing it. I separated myself from the situation, as a matter of speaking, right? Again, I'm 13, 14 years old, but I remember going where I grew up, there was the elementary was not far and there was a ball field behind it. And I remember just going there and there was a swing set and sitting on the swings and thinking it through, right? Taking that step back, taking a breath, and trying to understand it as a teenager. If I was an older adult, I would have been much better equipped to be able to walk my way through it. But that's the number one thing, at least from my perspective, that you need to do. Next is try and rebuild that relationship as quickly as you can in whatever way you can. I know, having spoken with children who've been alienated, they fear that reconnection.
Hmm.
What if, let's say, you've been alienated from your father? What if he rejects me? Or they'll say, rejects me again sometimes, right? He never
Mm.
really rejected you the first time, but you think he did. So therefore, he might do it again. And sadly, it does occasionally happen. We have to be honest about that.
Yeah.
But the sooner you can get together, like I said, I was a parent. A middle daughter was alienated from me for about 2 years when she was 6, 7, 8 years old. And I fought like hell in the courts and I finally won. That first night when I was going to pick her up individually, so the other kids weren't coming that night because that's what everybody was telling me we should do. And I picked her up and I remember I was terrified and I know she was too. But Maddie, it turned out It's sad, but it turned out amazing because it was about a 20-minute drive from my ex's house to my house. Dead silence. Both of us were like, what the hell? But the minute we got home and I sat in the living room I had this big dad chair, she came over, sat on the arm of the chair next to me she was 8 years old and did not leave my side
Oh
for
my God.
2.5, 3 hours.
Mm.
So, and we didn't really talk though.
Wow.
I needed it too, but she really needed that physical connection. And then it's tough. You're dealing with an 8-year-old versus, say, an 18-year-old or a
Mm.
28-year-old. It's a little different. You have to handle it different. But if you can replicate that type of thing, if you could get to that parent at that age, that doesn't mean you're sitting on the arm of the chair for 2 hours, but in whatever way,
Yeah.
start rebuilding that bond. The sooner you do it, the sooner things will get better. And I understand the fear. I totally understand it. Please just overcome that fear because it's the
Yeah.
best thing you can do.
That's amazing advice. Oh my goodness. I sometimes think it can be in severe cases just like a phobia, you know?
Oh,
Like,
without question.
yeah, you got to put yourself through exposure therapy, like with your parent. That's what I did. And every time the fear got less and less. And now I don't really feel afraid with him at all. But did you ever feel when you were trying to reconnect with your dad, like you didn't know who he was? Because I
Oh,
definitely had
absolutely.
that feeling like, who are you? Like, who are you really? Like, did mom exaggerate a lot? How many lies are true? How do I get to know who you really are? Did you ever feel that? And how did you cope with that?
Always felt it, never got over it. It, I don't know that I did cope with it to answer that part of the question. Like I said, we always had that disconnect, right? And we had conversations many times about it, but he was struggling with it as much as I was. And you got to remember too, this is 30, 40, 50 years ago. Nobody knew what parental alienation was. It wasn't even
Mhm.
in existence, right? So there wasn't like a book you could go read back then. I think we, to use your word, coped as best we could, but it was, and some of it, to be honest, was probably a guy thing, right? We tend to bury our emotions. We're not going to talk about them, especially back then. Oh God, you did not talk about your feelings. So we never really fully connected, right? I knew he cared about me. I knew he loved me. I knew and know that he would have done anything for me without question. But there was still that damage had been done. And to your point about wondering, was any of what my mother said true? At first, yes, but I quickly figured out everything she said was a lie. There were kernels of truth in it, to be honest, but I quickly figured out not one word really coming out of her mouth was the truth. And maybe you do with cases, but in mine, it was almost not black and white, but pretty close to it.
Mine was too. Yeah, mine was
Yeah.
too.
It helped me to heal, but that relationship had been so damaged at that point. I don't think it ever could have been fully healed. And again, what makes it different is for me, it started when I was an infant.
Yeah.
I wish I could go back and be a fly in the wall when I was like 2 years old, because I have obviously no memories of that. But what happened then, right?
Yeah.
And
It's
all of
it's almost
that.
impossible to form your own conclusion if you're not starting with a blank slate. It's almost
Exactly.
impossible.
And the family would never talk about it, either side. My mother's side of the family mostly didn't know about it. They heard what she was telling them and they believed it, right? When I talked to some of them afterward, she wouldn't do that. Let me explain some things to you, Lucy, okay? And then I would say, and look what she's saying about Cheryl. I was there. I saw this. And I would give specifics. And then they started figuring it out. And ultimately, she got disowned by the whole family. She died alone. Like literally, the entire family disowned her.
For this exact reason or for
For
other
this,
reasons?
there were other reasons, but they really figured out this was most. She was so toxic and she would get
Yeah.
angrier and angrier. She couldn't get to me anymore. My
Yeah.
sister disowned her.
Oh, wow. Your sister become fully alienated, or was she able to resist it like you did?
No, she could not resist it like I did. I would say she was probably somewhere around 90, 95% alienated. Not fully, but she ended up starting to do drugs, drinking, all that stuff as a young teen. Again, I'm 6 years older than her, so I'm out of the house completely at that point. She had a lot of issues that she was going through, but she always had that nugget of something ain't right. And
Right.
what was interesting was because her story is not that much different for me with her reconciliation. She figured it out eventually through me because she came to me one time and she said, Dan, can I talk to you? And I was, so she was 17, I was 24 at the time. And I'm like, sure, what are you going to talk about? She's 16, 17. Because I want to ask you some questions. Okay. And she started asking me about specific things. I knew the truth. And I said, Charles, I'm going to be honest with you. I'm not going to hold back on anything. Your dad and I didn't get along because him and I were very much not getting along. But I said, most of what you believe about him is wrong. Him and I didn't get along, but he was a great dad to you. And we had that conversation. I vividly remember that conversation. And shortly thereafter, she reconciled with him, and they ended up having a great relationship until he passed away. And I thank God for that. And he did try and reach out to me at one point, and I did not take the call, which I regret a little bit. But like I said, him and I just did not get along. But I know he genuinely appreciated what I did,
Oh
you
my
know.
goodness. I just got shiver bumps all over. You like saved your sister's relationship with her
Yeah,
dad.
it's one of the highlights
Incredible.
of my life. And she has said that many times, right? But she, like me, still struggles. She is 54, soon to be 55. In fact, it's today. I just realized today's her birthday. Whoops, I haven't sent her a happy birthday. Once we're done, I will. So she's 55 today. But she's been through a couple divorces. Like me, trust is a big issue with her. And she, again, like me, she's always waiting for that shoe to drop. And so the parallels are there. And I think
Yeah.
that's something neither one of us will ever get over.
I can relate to that. I've heard it said that it's a life sentence. You'll be healing from this for the rest of your life.
I'll be healing
Um,
from it when I'm 6 feet under.
oh no, I hope not.
Or in my case, an salt urn in the ocean, because that's what I'm doing when I get. I live near the ocean, so I'm going to be cremated, put into one of those salt urns, and dropped off the coast.
That doesn't sound too bad.
It's a pretty
So,
coast. I know
I
you know where it is. So
yes. So we didn't really have too much time to go into your experience being alienated from your own kids,
mhm.
but I don't know if you want to talk about that at all.
I'm an open book, Maddie. I figured out long ago that holding any of it in was not productive and not good. So I will share it all, good, bad, or indifferent. And anyone who's listening that's gone through what you and I have gone through or has gone through it as a targeted parent,
Mhm.
the tendency is to button up. It's the worst mistake you can make. And I speak from personal experience. It was when I started opening up, sharing, talking about it, right? I speak about men's and boys' issues. I've been doing it for 30 years, which coincidentally is when I started healing, right?
Mm.
The worst mistake I made was not talking about it. So I will shout to the high heavens anything. There's nothing you can't ask me.
I love that. That's similar to how I am. But I am wondering, with that being said, what is your opinion on how parents should deal with their children who are going through alienation? Because there's this huge debate, and all these people saying not to ever tell your child that they're going through it or anything like that.
I don't know that there is one solution, Maddie. I think it's unique to the circumstance, the family, and even within my own children. It's unique amongst, there's two of them that one is still alienated from me.
Oh
Have not
gosh.
had a conversation with him since 2001.
Oh my God. I'm so
And
sorry.
it is what it is. The other one I've shared already, right? Which we have a relationship. It is not what it should be. A lot of the problem is distance. She lives almost 900 miles from me. She was supposed to come down in a couple of weeks. Unfortunately, she lost her job, got another one, doesn't have time off. So we're rescheduling that. That relationship is what it is. It's getting better. She knows that I love her and vice versa and all that. The other one, I don't know that it'll ever be repaired. I have tried many times. Talk about what I did with that. I did each one differently. So my older son, she completely turned him against me. And the funny thing was, he was living with me at the time. And she wanted the child support. So
Wow.
that was her reasoning for turning him. He does not know that. So to your point, should I tell him that? I never have.
Maybe he'll see this interview one day.
I treat that one differently. So I have 4 children with her.
Hmm.
So my oldest and youngest were the two that were alienated or attempted to be alienated. The two middle resisted it. They were like me, resisted it hard. Like they will, to the point they told my second wife, we view you as our mother, not her, even though they still had a relationship with her. So they've never disowned her or anything like that. It's a really
That's a
weird
unique
dynamic.
dynamic.
Oh, it's
Are
weird.
are the siblings able to have any type of
They
relationship
have
then?
great relationships. Um, I take some of the credit for that. So one thing that my oldest daughter has said repeatedly to me, including not too long ago, you never forced us to take sides, Dad. You never. So I'll give you a beautiful example. My ex-wife will not allow me to have a holiday with the children. For example, my daughter hosts Christmas dinner. One or the other of us has to be there, and it's always got to be her.
Okay.
So I would go over for breakfast or something like that. I've never really pushed the issue because I still get time with them, right? So is it worth me saying, creating this huge issue to say, I want dinner instead of breakfast? Why? That just creates animosity, right? But my daughter recognizes that I'm taking the high road,
Mm-hmm.
right? And they're twins. Her brother sees the same thing. Privately, and I'll say it publicly now, they both have told me how much they appreciate the way I've handled everything. I have never put down my ex directly with them. I know damn they've seen my videos. Okay, I'm not gonna. But they're also 35 years old now. Okay, but when they were growing up, I was meticulous about making sure that no bad words were ever said about their mother
Yeah, that's
in
amazing. And
front of them.
that's so important too for parents, I think, listening or watching, because you can show your child what is healthy and then they will be able to see what isn't healthy if you show
Mhm.
them what is healthy. But if they're not able to be exposed to a healthy parent-child relationship, they won't know healthy from unhealthy. And then they're more likely to go into a toxic romantic relationship. Yeah. We could probably talk for hours, but I know
I
that
know we
we're
could.
coming up to the end of our time here. So
Sure.
let me give you one last question, and then I'd like to talk briefly about the work that you do. I know that you've spoken out about parental alienation previously and men's issues, fathers' issues, boys' issues. To you, why is it so important that we do share our stories, even if we do face backlash?
It's critical that we do, Maddie. The work that you're doing and your team is doing, God bless you all, really. There have been times I've talked about it and I felt completely alone talking about it because
Hmm.
we're the only ones. And that's why, that's exactly the reason why people need to speak up, right? Because we are not alone. Depending on what survey you look at or who you talk to, 20, 30% of the population in some way or some manner has been alienated. I think the latest numbers I saw was 22 million kids are alienated. The numbers always fluctuate. You never know which
Hmm.
one's exactly right. But I think it's fair to say somewhere between a third and a fifth of all children are alienated in some way. Doesn't may not be to the level you and I were, but in some way. Even in intact marriages, by the way, it doesn't even have
Yes.
to involve divorce.
Yes.
And I talk about this also with people that, because I'm a victim of domestic violence with my first wife. Same scenario, right? Until we speak up and share our stories, we're not going to be heard. The reason I named my social media channels Men Need to Be Heard is exactly that. We have to speak up. It's scary. I understand, and I have no fear of public speaking, as you can probably tell, but I understand most people do. You can still share your story. I can get in front of an audience of 5,000 people without batting an eye. Most people can't do that. Write a letter to the editor when they put it, I really dated myself because there aren't many newspapers. If they ran a story on parental alienation,
Mm.
write a letter to the editor, right? Online, if you see somebody posting on that. And I know you deal with this, there are so many wars that go back and forth. Well, stop with the studies. Who cares?
Yeah.
Share your story because that shuts all the studies down, in my opinion, right? So, me talking about what I went through, you talking about what you went through, and all the people that you work with, that actually is what resonates more with the public than some study that Harvard did or whatever. And the more we do it, the more people will feel comfortable doing it.
Absolutely. I think that there is something to that because every time that I have someone who's been alienated on my channel or and interview them, I get a bunch of messages from more people wanting to share their stories the next
Mhm.
following days. So it really does inspire more people to want to speak up when they hear from other people. I think it's really important to try to show the variety of experiences that people can have with this same type of abuse.
Oh,
But
absolutely, it does. Because again, our stories may have many similarities, but they're also unique in their own way. You can, so my channels are Men Need to Be Heard. There's various iterations of them. On TikTok, it's Men Need to Be Heard 3 because I've been banned 4 times for speaking about issues. YouTube, Insta, and most of the others, it's Men Need to Be Heard. And Twitter, it's Men Need the number 2 to be heard. What I talk about with my channels is stuff like this, right? People will say you're a men's rights activist. I'm not. I don't like that label. Do I speak about men's rights and men's issues? Absolutely, I do. But MRA, I don't like being lumped into that because I'm not anti-woman. I'm not even anti-feminism, to be honest with you. Old school feminism, right? I fully support it. But I like to bring out awareness on issues like parental alienation, domestic violence, I talk about frequently. I've written a book on domestic violence. I'm in the process of writing a book about false allegations. Similar to what you're doing, my goal is to share people's stories, to talk about my personal experiences, and make people understand. I just did a video that posted in the last day or so. I forget when they post because I put them out so far in advance, but one of the key points I was making is everybody thinks men and women are this far apart and different. We're really not. We're very much the same. And what men go through and suffer from and all that is not all that much different from women. The difference is men aren't heard and men don't speak up about it. I lay the blame on men, by the way. All right. And that's why I do what I do. Sometimes upset people. I'm not going to lie because I also know, having worked in media and all that, sometimes you got to break a few eggs to get your message across, right? So some people don't like some of what I say, but most people with an open mind, it makes them click. And I get DMs like you do every day going, "Oh my God, I never thought of that," or "Thank God you said that," or "Thank you for what you do."
yeah,
And that's why I do what I do. I could be off golfing and hanging at the beach every day, but I do this because I think it's my job as a 61-year-old man who's a domestic violence survivor, a PA survivor, to share my story and help people your age to not go through what I went through.
that's really powerful. That's really noble. And I admire you for doing that.
Well,
I've
thank you.
watched your videos and I actually found them really insightful. There's one that you made, I think it was a reel, and it was something about what men really want from women or from their girlfriends or something like that. And I watched it and then I was
I've done
like,
a few of those. Oh, is
yeah,
that the most recent one?
no, it was one from a
No.
while ago when
Yeah,
we
I've
were
done them.
first starting to put together an interview a few months
Yeah.
ago.
Oh, that was a while ago.
And
I know. I
yeah,
think I know which one you're talking
I
about.
turned to my
Yeah.
husband. I'm like, this makes sense. Can you watch this? And he watched it and yeah, he's right.
And that, but it's funny because, like you, I get a lot of backlash, right? Most of my backlash comes from women.
Yeah.
And,
So does mine.
oh, really?
Yes.
The ones that I talk to that are reasonable and you can have a conversation with through DMs and all that, when I explain what I'm doing, you just hate women. That's their default go-to. But when I have actual conversations, it starts clicking. And you can see, oh boy, I'm having an effect here, right? And if it helps them to have better relationships, whether it's a husband, men at work, whatever, my job is done, right? And I don't hate women, and I know you don't either, but they tend to be the ones that come after me. And I think it's because I do talk a lot about the double standards that men face, right? Domestic violence being a classic one where there's 2 shelters in the entire country for men and a country of 150 million men. And they get upset about that. But it's not to, I don't want to ever take anything away from women's issues. I've talked about women's issues many times. I'm just saying, can't we talk about the men's also? And with regard to PAs, the same thing. I get so much backlash from single moms primarily for
Me too.
daring to talk about PA. And I'm like, do you have a son? Yeah. Do you want your son to grow up like I did, and I'll have conversations with them like that. And 9 times out of 10, it doesn't work. But that 1 out of 10 that it does, that's why I do what I do.
Thank you. And I think there are a whole bunch of women out there that also don't appreciate these women because women are not better than men. Mothers are not better than fathers.
Just be open-minded about it. Here are stories. Don't tell us it didn't happen, but at least be honest about it that you don't know what we're talking about. And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah. And I think this huge effort on part of a lot of different feminist organizations and different individuals, it's even seeping into the law now of parental alienation being pseudoscience. I think that is part of what is keeping alienated children from learning the truth.
It's a form of abuse, and my feeling, this is my personal opinion, I don't know where you stand on it, that they've known it's abuse for a long time. And when I say they, I'm talking about the mental wellness area, and they haven't addressed it. Again, much like feminists will tend to do, the best way to avoid dealing with what they've done is to deny that it even exists.
Why do you think they don't want to address it?
Because think about this. If they've been saying for 30, 40 years there's no such thing as parental alienation, and now they have to admit there is, it's a big ask, right? I think a lot of it is they don't want to admit they were wrong.
This has been really great interview. Thank you for being here.
Oh,
I
you're
know it's
welcome.
not easy to speak out, but you seem like you have got it under control. You got this.
I've been doing it for 30 years. I am uncancelable. There's nothing they can do to me. They hate that more than anything else. And I think, honestly, I speak about issues that make people uncomfortable, but I think I'm fair. One of the things that I hear often from people who aren't, let's say, on our side, the ones that are in the middle, is that you at least talk about it civilly. And that's really what my goal is, because that is the best way to affect change. Screaming and yelling doesn't do anything.
Oh, yeah. Oh, definitely. I really appreciate you giving some time tonight to share your story. It's just really touching, and you're definitely an expert in this space, having lived through it from both perspectives.
I wish I wasn't, but yeah.
Yeah, I wish you weren't either. But I'm glad that you are here. And it's because of people like you who have been doing this already that I felt safe enough to start doing it to begin with. So I think that like one fire ignites another fire, ignites another fire. And so I just want to say thank you for putting yourself out there and speaking about these hard things.
I appreciate that and everything you and your team are doing.
Thank
Well, I wish you had been around 20 years ago, Maddie, honestly, because you are affecting change, right? And people listening to this need to make sure they follow you, because you speak so eloquently about it. And I think, much like me, you're very fair in what you say. And your team is. I say you, but not just you, but your whole team. Again, we're trying to help raise awareness and help ultimately children.
Yeah.
In the end of it, we're helping children, right?
Yeah.
Is there any better thing you could do with your life? And you're doing it. I could see you 30 years from now.
Oh no.
I'll be off the beach in my little salt urn. You'll be taking over for me, and I would be honored if you did.
Oh, Dan, no, this needs to be solved before then. I don't need
Well,
to be doing this in 30 years.
let's hope it is.
Everybody who's listening, make sure you go follow Dan at Men Need to Be Heard. Like I said, I feel like we could talk for hours. Anyway, I will let you go because I know we're already over our allotted time period, but thank you so much for everything you do. And thanks for being here.
You're welcome, Maddie.
Thanks so much for watching this interview. I hope that you found it helpful or insightful. Once again, please show your support for Dan in the comments. Head on over to Men Need to Be Heard and check out his channel. Show him some support and subscribe if you like his content. And for anyone else out there who's been through alienation as a child, your story is important too. And my door is always open for anyone who would like to share their story on my project. Please reach out to me at the Anti-Alienation Project at gmail.com. I'll see you next time. Bye.